Hello, everybody. My name is Guy Ellis. This is Leadership Inside Out. I'm with Whitney Simon today, who I've been doing a little bit of research on, absolutely looking forward to today's conversation. But I'll let Whitney introduce herself in her own words, and we'll get started. Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you so much, Guy. I'm so pleased to be here and really excited to chat with you a bit more. So a bit about me. My name is Whitney Simon. I'm a senior account director and head of D&I consulting at Missive. As you can probably tell, I don't have a lovely British accent. I moved to the UK about 6 years ago from San Francisco. Um, I guess my journey into D&I started in PR. I've worked at a number of different agencies, starting with consumer public relations, selling baby products, tech products, and then I moved to San Francisco. I'm originally from Boston, where I got into the tech PR industry, and I think that's what really started my passion for D&I. Because obviously working in the tech sector, there's countless innovations, but I think one of the most important things when we're talking about innovation is making sure that it's accessible and equitable for all kinds of people that are going to be using it. And as part of kind of the work that I was doing at different agencies in San Francisco, I worked with a lot of nonprofits that were aimed at creating more equity within the sector. So nonprofits that were focused on getting more people of color into the sector, nonprofits that were aimed at getting more queer people into the sector. And so I think it just all kind of started rumbling under the surface. And then I had the opportunity to move to London with my partner, where I was able to continue building on kind of the tech PR expertise, but also building on that D&I passion and just kind of expertise as well. And then I think it all came to a head when I was selected to be part of a leadership scheme that was aimed at getting more people of color into senior positions in agencies, communication organizations, and just wider organizations. And I think it was doing that year-long scheme that really cemented for me that my purpose, my passion, what really gets me excited is helping people, feel equipped to have conversations about D&I. Whether it's talking with my clients about making sure that we have an equitable lens on campaigns that we push out, stories that we tell, or supporting them when it comes to social media and making sure that we're using inclusive language. And then I think, luckily at the agency that I work at, Missive, I had some really fantastic leaders that recognized that passion, and came to me and said, why not try to launch a consultancy where we can offer these services as kind of like your bread and butter, expertise. And feel really grateful that I launched the consultancy in October last year. And since then have just been really excited to be able to kind of share that expertise and being able to work with people to talk about how can we truly create inclusive workplaces.
Wow. Wow. So you're launched a new business. Is that part of that's part of the existing consultancy?
It is part of the existing consultancy at this stage. I think the vision and the goal is to make it really successful and spin it out. And I think what I feel really grateful for is that I have people within Missive right now who just see the potential and opportunity and really back me and support me. I think one of the things I always talk about in D&I is the importance of having those allies and those champions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we live in a world that, isn't fair. We're still dealing with a lot of systemic oppression, whether it comes from race, gender, sexual identity. And allies play such an important role in really giving you that platform and making sure that are amplifying you and promoting you in those rooms that we don't have access to. And I have a number of people within this business who act in that way, and I feel really grateful. But yeah, it's not something I ever envisioned for myself. And um I guess that's how life is. Life can be really funny. I didn't envision myself moving to London, envision myself starting a business, but sometimes there are bigger plans for us out there. I guess that's what makes life interesting, right?
Yeah. So and it's fascinating because you've both physically overcome a lot of barriers. Boston to Los Angeles, Boston to the East Coast, West Coast, sorry. I mean, that is quite a cultural transformation. But then from the US to London, um, I, can you give me a little bit of insight in terms of that physical shift, but also with the sort of reference thinking about the sort of cultural differences you've had to face, just
Absolutely.
in terms of society.
Yeah. I think so the move from Boston to actually San Francisco,
So,
um, it's really interesting because I think a lot of the time people are just like, oh, it's America, it's all the same thing. And I think it was a real wake up moment for me when I moved from Boston to San Francisco. I was at an international university where we had a lot of people from around the world. There was a lot of diversity. And then I think once I graduated college and started working in Boston, it kind of helped me recognize a lot of the disparity and the discrimination that is still very much apparent within kind of the East Coast, despite the fact that we look at these things as these places as super progressive and inclusive. And then moving to San Francisco, I was really excited because I identify as a Black queer woman. I was really excited to be in a space where, San Francisco, we're talking about, where LGBTQ rights, so many major things happened in San Francisco. And I was so excited to be in a community with people in that space and kind of building that out. And I moving to San Francisco was a bit of shell shock, really, because the San Francisco that I was thinking about, Haight Ashbury, thinking about the Castro, a lot of that had been transformed because of the rise of the tech sector in Silicon Valley. So a lot of those places are kind of shells of what they used to be because they've been priced out. A lot of the diversity, the creativity that, we see in movies has also been pushed out. And as a result, a lot of that diversity has been pushed out too. And I think for me, it was really enlightening to kind of go to these places and recognize that one, what we necessarily see on TV isn't what actually is. And then recognizing that, you know, sometimes we have these really like literal, visceral images of what discrimination is. And it's not necessarily that simple. It's very nuanced. I think, you know, in San Francisco, I want to say that was probably one of the lowest points in my life and in my career because I felt so isolated. I felt as though you don't see a lot of people of color in San Francisco proper. The queer community, a lot of it is very much like middle class people that work in the tech sector. And if you're not actually in that sector, you kind of get overlooked. And so I think it just made me recognize that we can't always just take something at surface level. There's a lot of nuance. And, that nuance, while it can be difficult to navigate, there's also power in it because I think it can help you recognize what are the opportunities I have, what are the things that I want, what are the different spaces that I can engage in so that I can get what I need. And then I think it got me to London. And again, I took things at surface level. I was like, I'm moving to an English speaking country. It's going to be fine. No issues.
oh,
Then I
no.
moved here and I was like, okay, the English is completely different. I was saying like crisps, chips, jumpers, trainers, all of it. I was just like, I don't know how to navigate this. But I think it was also a really I feel really grateful that I've had so many opportunities to get myself out of my comfort zone because it's in those moments that you're really able to find out what you're capable of, find out the things that you're really passionate about. And being in the UK, I think it helped me recognize how privilege, when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not just about white or black or man or woman. There's a lot of privilege in being an American living in London. There's a lot of privilege in, being someone who I'm married to someone who works in the tech sector, moving here into the UK. And so I think it helped me really evolve my thinking about D&I and to become a more holistic, well-versed D&I practitioner, because I was able to take my experiences in the US and compare them to my experiences here in the UK and have conversations that reflect the nuance of D&I instead of looking at it as very much like it's unconscious bias and, we need to not have that. And that's how we solve D&I issues, which unfortunately, it's not that simple.
No, no. It's interesting. I immigrated, as we were talking about, from New Zealand many, many years ago, and people assume the same thing. English-speaking ex-British colony. In fact, the subtleties made it a real struggle for me for a while, because the things you just expect, you get thrown all the time. So I do sympathize a lot.
I mean, even thinking about working culture, I totally underestimated it. Like, in the US, it's characterized by being super direct, super loud. We're very positive, a lot of smiling. We love to show off our teeth. And when I was working in PR in the States and I was working with London agencies, I remember thinking like, oh, I don't understand how they work. Why is it so difficult? Like, we just have to take our US messaging and they, pitch it out. It's fine. Then working here helped me to recognize America is not the center of the world. And when we're thinking about doing comms, right? Like communicating with audiences, what British, UK, European audiences want is completely different to what Americans want. For England, for example, much more cynical. There's very much a stiff upper lip. It's not, we're not very verbose. Everything is a lot more subtle. And so even navigating that from a working culture was something I had to get used to, and recognizing that just coming in being really big, brash, and like, everything is great. That's not how people necessarily here work, and needing to understand how to meet them where they're at, and create kind of working dynamics that work for both of us.
Certainly. I mean, you've talked about a couple of barriers, culturally, location-wise. Anything else that comes that sort of you reflect back on that you think, wow, that was a struggle at the time?
Yeah, I think something that I'm always regularly trying to navigate is just my experiences in the States. They still very much inform kind of how I see myself here. So I guess to be more specific, I had a lot of instances of kind of racial discrimination at the agencies I worked at in the States. Having leaders saying that we took a chance on you, calling out my Blackness, not inviting me to events. And I think there was a lot of internalizing all of those instances into thinking, well, I'm just not good enough. I shouldn't be here. And it did end up leading to me, when I moved here, thinking I don't even want to go into PR anymore. And then I think when I got to London, I recognized it's really difficult to make friends when you're older. And so the easiest way to do it is to work, if I'm being so honest.
Absolutely.
And even though I was in a different market, I'd had like a lot of feedback that was different. And the relationship to race here is completely different than it is to the US. And a lot of the barriers that I had in the US weren't necessarily here, because I should say that as a Black American woman here, I have a much easier time than, say, a Black British person. My race isn't the first thing that people see when I walk into a room here. They're just like, oh, she's American. Whereas in the States, it was, always my race first, then my gender. And then when they found out my sexual identity, it was a whole cluster. But I think I still internalize a lot of those experiences, and it led to a lot of self-doubt and questioning whether I'm good enough, whether I'm meant to be here. And it can be really difficult. Also, starting this consultancy, it's not something I ever thought I would do. There's a lot of times where I'm like, I don't know if, why should people come to me? And so I think it's always something that I try to remind myself of, like you said this in your intro, the experiences that I've had, negative, positive and negative, they have helped shape me to get to this point. And while I'm regularly working on addressing that imposter syndrome, I think it's also helped me to be more humble. It's helped me to be more empathetic. It's helped me to understand D&I topics, not just from like a theoretical perspective, but also just from a personal perspective. And there is power in that. There's so much power in our narratives and what shapes us and what we go through. And I've realized that my purpose is to take those negative experiences and try to use them to not only help other, Black, brown, queer, whomever, marginalized folks in these industries feel as though they can come in and they have a space, but also to help leaders understand when they're unwittingly creating non-inclusive spaces. It's very easy to know if someone says the N-word or if you see a lynching, like that's racist, but that's not necessarily what we deal with on a day-to-day basis in organizations. When we think of discrimination, it's, ethnic pay gaps, gender pay gaps. When we think of discrimination, it's, creating spaces where the only way that we engage socially in workplaces is by going out to drink. What if you have people who don't drink or who come from backgrounds that don't condone drinking? And so I think for me, it's having those conversations where discrimination, it's way more nuanced than that. And the way to address it and to combat that is also more nuanced. It's not just a tick box plan that's going to make it so that you are, a star in inclusion. It's an ongoing effort and you're going to be uncomfortable, but that is okay. So I feel really grateful for the experiences that at the time I thought would break me. I thought I would never come back from, because they got me to this point.
How did you cope? I mean, what some of the coping mechanisms you used, both at the time, but also in terms of reflection?
I'll be honest, at the time it was really bad. I think it was emotional eating, disassociation.
Uh-huh.
But I think one of the things I'm really grateful for is in the past years, like having therapy and having people that I can speak to who are objective about the challenges I've had, how my upbringing has informed a lot of kind of the way that I cope and react to things and how I internalize things. I also think finding purpose outside of work is super important. I think a lot of the reason why I had these negative feelings is that I equated my value to what I did for work and how successful I was at work. And that can be super toxic because, we all know sometimes work is going to go really great. Sometimes it's going to be really bad. It doesn't take away from the fact that you're a great individual, that I have a family that loves me. I'm a loving and supportive partner. I'm a loving and supportive friend. But I think sometimes I would get so narrow-minded on like, well, I didn't get that promotion or I messed that thing up, and just forget all those other things. So
Yeah.
starting to do exercise is something that I find very meditative. I like to do strength lifting because I think there's something so empowering as a woman to be able to go in and like outlift, some of the men that are in the gym. Love it. I also really love to read. I think for me, reading is another form of dissociation, but I think it's a bit more productive in that I'm able to understand diverse experiences through the eyes of, whoever is speaking in a story. I also grew up singing, and music has always been a really powerful tool for me. So if I'm feeling really low, like this week with the election, music is what kind of helped me through and helped me process things, figure out how I'm feeling, and singing as well. But I think kind of in addition to that, just like finding community, I think the leadership scheme that I did was so important for me because it made me recognize that I'm not alone in being a person of color in a fairly white industry. Um, and there's so much power in recognizing that like there are others like you, and even just like outside of like industry networks, but like my friends, like my partner, like really bringing together the people that support and love you, who can also remind you of like, okay, you had a bad day, it's one day. And those are all tools that I still try to lean on, because I think it's important. We're living in a time where things can feel very chaotic and scary and out of our control. And I think having those kind of key elements in your life, like community, like your passion areas, are really good anchoring points for reminding you that the world is so much bigger than work, what we're seeing on the news. The people that are immediately around you are also there too.
Wow. And if you look forward, clearly you've still got a career ahead of you, many years of a career ahead of you.
Fingers crossed.
I mean, what's your thoughts? So, you've gone through clearly a lot already, but life will continue to throw things at you. What's your preparation? Have you thought about, that resilience and how you continue to develop that going forward?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I guess to get to that point, one of the things that I struggle with is also like mental health issues. Like I was signed off sick for about a month a couple years ago. And I think during that time, part of the thing that really just like threw me off center was recognizing that, there's always going to be something that happens, whether it's like family getting sick, family passing away, having a pandemic. And I think at the time, I just could not cope with that, thinking that I constantly have to deal with life just throwing things. But since then, I do feel as though I've embraced and I've started to see the beauty in the fact that like there's always going to be something in life. That is what it is to live, to struggle, to have pain, to grieve, but then also to have those really powerful moments. And so one of the things I keep reminding myself is that there are always going to be really difficult things that feel insurmountable. But this feeling is a feeling that I've had before in my life, and I've been able to navigate it. And so anything else that comes my way, no matter how difficult it is, I'll also be able to navigate it. And that I don't have to navigate it alone. Like I said before, like I'm someone who can tend to just like withdraw when things are hard. But in recent years, I've recognized reaching out to people who genuinely care and want to support me, um, sharing my experiences, and my challenges. Like one of the things I'm hosting at the end of November, so it's not going to be when this is out. Will have already passed, but I'm hosting a mental health workshop for Black and Brown people in the PR industry. And it really is a result of the experiences I've had to give space to people of color in this industry. Because when it comes to mental health, it is really specific. A lot of the challenges that we face in mental health are a result of discrimination, microaggressions. And so I wanted to create a space where we could have an open conversation about that. Um, and so I think just like having those spaces, whether it's an event that I host or attending other events, just having people in place and reaching out to my network to remind me that, we all are going to get through this together, no matter how hard. And also just looking at the big picture. I mean, if someone had said 6 years ago I would end up in London starting a consultancy, I would have been like, you're joking. Like, what are you on? But here I am. Like, I have no idea what the world has in store for me. And there's
Mhm.
actually a lot of excitement in that. And so I'm also trying to tell myself to just kind of take it a day at a time, because you just don't know.
No, no, it's wonderful words. Thank you. And I truly understand. I mean, I look back through some of the tough times over the last 30 years and think, like yourself, it'll never be as bad as it was when I was 6, and my parents separated, and I brought up my sister to a large extent, and you get through that, you get through all of that discord, and you put it in perspective. But also, I was going to ask, friends and family come up quite a lot, but again, as an immigrant, um, I'll assume, but please do correct me, that most of your family will probably back in Boston.
That's right. You're right. That's true. I think one of the things, it is really isolating sometimes, especially when big things are happening in the States. And I feel like I'm not able to support my friends and family in the way that I do. But I also think in being queer and being out, and I did end up marrying my partner and having a wedding. There is a level, or early on, I recognized that family isn't just blood relations. It's the
Absolutely.
people who are there for you when you need it. It's the people who love you and create space for you. And I feel very lucky that I have created that here. They may not look like me, they may not have the same last name as me, but I know that I have a solid set of family here who, if anything happened to me or my partner, I could call them up and they'd be there. And, you know, distance can be really difficult, but we're also really lucky in that we have so much technology that, can make it that if I want to, I can FaceTime my mom right now, vent to her about something that's happening at work or with my partner, and she's able to be there and support as well. So I guess for me, I use the term friends and family in a very I guess in a more open way, because I recognize that, I always say this. I met my partner on OkCupid, throwback. The youths probably don't even know what that app is now. Um, she was a relative stranger, and now I genuinely don't know what life would look like without her. So I don't think family always has to be the ones with the same bloodline or last name. I think family can be whatever you make it.
Thank you. Any advice? Any advice for people? Again, a unique set of circumstances, American, Black woman, queer, so you've got a lot of perceived barriers that you've had to face, continue to face. Any advice for someone who's facing one or some or all of those?
Yeah, I would say there is power in what makes us different. I think, again, part of what makes me a good D&I practitioner is I'm not just talking about what's in a book or what I've seen or what I've read in a research paper or seen in a TV show. A lot of what informs my training is what I've experienced. And that is an advantage. I also think a lot of the things that I've navigated, as I said earlier before, have helped me to better understand how to relate to people, how to listen to people, how to empathize with people. And so I think a lot of the times it can feel as though what makes us different is a negative. And yes, in a lot of instances, like it can be difficult to navigate the world in this body, but there's also a lot of beauty and there's a lot of beauty and power in this body that I live in and I navigate the world in. And I try to remind myself of that. I also think another piece of advice is to be open to the curveballs that life is going to throw at you. Because again, I think life can be wild, and it can throw things at you that you never expected. But a lot of like the major lessons, the big changes in my life have come from those curveballs. And I would encourage folks to embrace them. That's what makes life interesting, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I mean, wonderfully put, wonderfully. I just love the phrase, the body, the vessel that I'm in, because I think that just for me sums it up perfectly. What's inside us, this is just a body for us. What's inside of us is completely unique and special and different from everyone else. It's not just what people see, although that does inform some of who we are, but it's everything else that people can't see. So thank you.
Of course. And I guess the only thing I would add is that when life does get hard, also give yourself the space to acknowledge and, grieve or process in the way that you need to. I think right now I'm in a fairly like positive spot, but there have been times where I'm just like, why is it so hard to navigate the world living this way? And the worst thing you can do is to not give yourself the space to feel that. So I think it's also about living in a balanced way where you recognize, even if other people don't recognize it, you recognize the power you have, but then also giving yourself space to feel those negative emotions when they come up, because I mean, that is life too. There's gonna be some crappy moments as well as some beautiful ones.
I just wanted to take a small deviation, but I think given your role, given what you've experienced, I think it's certainly fascinating to talk about, which is the support that you've got or you seem to have at the moment from your organization.
Definitely.
Has that, and it sounds from what you've said like that's been quite a critical support in terms of your career, but also what seems to be a much more comfortable space in your life right now than you've possibly experienced earlier.
Definitely. I think I never really understood allyship or people genuinely like investing or believing in me until I was in this role and I started doing this D&I work. Because it's very easy for someone to be like, oh, that's great, like really happy for you. It's another thing for someone to be like, let me invest time, let me invest resources, um, let me invest my network into the work that you're doing. And those are all things that I've been grateful to receive here. Um, and it's something that when I talk to D&I clients, I challenge them to think about what are the active ways that you're being an ally. It's very easy for someone to call themselves an ally, but what are the actions that you're taking? What are the things that you're doing? What are the conversations that you're having when no one else is listening or watching? Because that's when you really see allyship. Like that's genuine allyship versus performative allyship. Um, and that's something that I hope to continue on and pass on as I hopefully become a leader in the D&I space.
And would again, you've touched on it just briefly, but would that be advice to try and find allies?
I guess what I would say is usually when you're in a space, and this isn't always like, hard and fast rule, but usually when you're in a space, you're in an organization, you clearly kind of notice the people that are genuinely trying to invest their time in you, whether it's someone who's like, I see you're struggling with this thing. How about we spend 30 minutes and I can walk you through it? Or I recognize you're really gifted at writing. I feel as though this course could be really helpful for you. Let me connect you with this person, help you get on there. Um, and so I think as a person of color or a person from a marginalized background looking for allies, I think it's often you get into a space and you can sense who there is willing to invest the time, energy, and resource. From, I guess, from an organizational perspective, if you're trying to think about how can I be an ally, I think it's thinking about what are the things that I can do that I can actually do versus say. So if you say you're an ally to a queer person and you're on a call, or for example, if you say you're an ally to a trans person and you're on a call with them and they're constantly being misgendered, a true ally is someone who would step in and be like, that's incorrect. Actually, their pronouns are, XYZ. Can we please make sure that we do that? It's those tiny actions that you don't necessarily need to be asked for. It's just you recognize like this is someone who's in a space where they're not in the majority. So how can I create space for them? I think for me, that's what allies are really good at doing, creating space and amplifying people who don't have access to that. So if you're looking to be an ally or if you're questioning whether you are one, I think one question to ask is, how am I creating space? How am I using my privilege to create space and amplify for those who may not have my privilege? And if you're looking for allies, I would say, who are the people who, again, without asking, work to create that space for me?
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's interesting because when I first came to the UK, I also worked at a company where I had a number of people help take the rough edges off, and it gave me a wonderful career because they set me on the right track. But here am I 35 years later, trying to give something back because two or three people took the time to actually help me help me help me readjust or help me to adjust to the UK culture, help me adjust to tech, big organization and all the rest of it. And you never know quite what knock-on effect that help can do and how long it can last.
Yeah, I love the way that you put it, taking the rough edges off. Like I think we all are navigating our own challenges. And so to have people that are there that are just like, let me just make this slightly easier does make such a huge difference. Like, and I think regardless of where you're from, your background, like I think we all can remember a time where things were just like a little bit rough and you had one person who just went out of their way to be like, hey, let me help you out here. I feel as though you need some help. You didn't have to ask for it. They just sensed it and did that for you. And it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Whitney. Anything? I mean, we've covered enormous ground, and I feel honoured to have been a small part of listening to it. I'm sure there's much more that you can cover. But is there anything else that you'd like to talk about? Anything that you'd like to get across to the listeners? Practical advice, encouragement, words of wisdom.
Yeah, tall out. But no, I think, on a more serious note, it can be scary times. I think we're living in a world where we're constantly inundated with terrible news or seeing, a lot of horrible things take place in different places, and it can feel really isolating. And I think now is the time to really lean on your community and think about ways you can make a difference in your small circle. You know, I know for a fact that like the change that I want to make in the D&I space, I'm not going to see it in my lifetime, but if I can make a little change in the people, the communities that I'm part of here in London, that is more than enough. And so I just challenge and encourage people to think about what can they do to make those small ripples of change in their communities, because it does make a difference. It all adds up.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a real joy to listen to you and to hear your journey. And clearly, there's a heck of a journey still to come. And all the very, very best of luck.
Thank you so much, Guy. It's been an honor to be on the show with you and to speak with you.